المكي نمر من ورق، وبعد بضع ضربات ركض في الهزيمة. لقد شهدنا في العقد الماضي
My name is Madison Hutchinson. On 9/11, I was 7 years old and in the second grade. I lived in Somerset, Kentucky and attended Victory Christian School. So I don't remember much except thinking my parents were watching a really scary movie and it just made me cry and obviously they were crying.
My name is Fred Bartels. I was 14 years old on the day that 9/11 happened. I was in 8th grade in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. I remember people telling me like very vague stories because no one really knew what happened. And people thought it was just a prop plane hitting a TV tower or something like that.
My name is Anna Quintana. On 9/11, I was 15 years old in the 9th grade at Barbara Goldman High School in Miami, Florida. To get to my mom's job, she'd have to drive on the highway and it was right by the airport and I was just always terrified every single day, like when she went back to work a few days later.
So I heard Osama bin Laden's hiding in the caves. And the only cave I knew of was Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. So I was scared to go on my field trip because I thought Osama bin Laden was hiding in Mammoth Cave. Yeah, I'd say a lot of people our age don't understand why we're still fighting in the Middle East. It's long after 9/11.
It's really incredible to think that we're still at war as a result of that.
I mean, we're here in DC, we work in foreign policy. We've got a lot of friends who were probably in DC on 9/11 when the plane hit the Pentagon. We should talk to them.
The foreign policy community was definitely engaged in 9/11, so let's do it. Bit of history on how this all began, I thought I'd first talk to Robin Simcox, who works in DC as a counterterrorism analyst.
Al-Qaeda is a terrorist group headed by Osama bin Laden, who was a very wealthy Saudi terrorist. They had an organization which had taken root in Afghanistan shortly before 9/11.
Tell me about Al-Qaeda's role on 9/11.
Al-Qaeda had financed, planned, executed 9/11. It was something that was in the making for months and months. It was something that they had very carefully devised as being an attack on America's military and financial and political capitals, something that they'd been planning for years, but was going to be their greatest statement of intent to date.
In 1998, they put out a declaration of jihad against the United States in which they said, end the occupation of our lands. They looked at several examples of where the U.S. had been attacked just one time and run for it.
So the idea was that they would attack New York and the U.S. would leave everywhere else.
The U.S. would get the message that it was too painful for us to stay in places like Saudi Arabia, and we'd withdraw our occupying forces from the entire Muslim world. They've talked repeatedly about world domination as their ultimate goal.
Al-Qaeda's intent with this attack was to fundamentally alter the way of life of Americans and America itself.
Steve was the first expert I thought of. I've known the Buccis for quite a while, and Steve was like a second dad to me. I thought they'd be great to talk to because they were both at the Pentagon on 9/11. They said they'd be happy to help, so I met them at a coffee shop, and we went to chat somewhere quieter.
My boss has an old friend, Dr. Randy Papadopoulos. He's a historian with the Department of the Navy. He knows all about the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon.
What happened on 9/11 was a series of 4 coordinated hijackings of airliners, all bound from the U.S. East Coast, heading for the United States West Coast. They're carrying a lot of fuel, and they're on nonstop flights, which means they carry even more fuel because they're going to be in the air for 5.5 or 6 hours. The first of those planes will crash into the World Trade Center at about 8:46 in the morning. 10 or 15 minutes later, everyone who was watching television would see the second airliner come in and strike the other World Trade Center tower. At which point, everybody on the ground realizes this is no accident.
So where were you on 9/11?
I was in the front office of the Pentagon with the Secretary of Defense. We had a congressional breakfast that morning. I was sent into an area in the Pentagon further inside the rings of the building, trying to determine what the heck we would do to respond to this, who might have done it, things like that.
In the case of American Airlines Flight 77, the airliner weighs about 100 tons. It has 18 tons of fuel left on board. It is flying along Columbia Pike, and the hijackers push the throttles to their stops.
As we were talking, we suddenly felt this boom. The whole building shifted.
When it crashes into the Pentagon, several people saw a bright orange fireball go over their cubicles and then flare and catch fire. That crash is devastating. 184 victims will be killed.
I looked around, I said, "Where's the boss?" Meaning Secretary Rumsfeld. And they said, "Oh, he went out to the crash site." I said, "What do you mean he went out to the crash site? You're not supposed to let him go to the dangerous place."
In the end, 600 firefighters will arrive at the Pentagon, along with 900 other first responders, police, paramedics, 2 companies of Maryland National Guard, all to secure the perimeter and make sure the firefighters can do their job. Parts of the hijackers' passports are found. We know their names. A box cutter was found inside the Pentagon, probably one that was on the airliner. As well, the flight data recorder from American Airlines Flight 77 is discovered, so we know what the flight profile was of the airplane.
I think one of the ways in which the world had changed after 9/11 was that it really brought home to you that the fact that there was this level of hatred that exists in the world that could carry out these kind of attacks and kill people in such large numbers. It's not like terrorism in the UK was unknown to us. Of course it was. We had lived through the IRA and there'd been the peace accord signed relatively recently before. But this was obviously a very new form of hatred, I think, to people. The IRA didn't kill in the thousands on one afternoon. I don't think they ever thought about turning planes into missiles and carrying out slaughter in the way that Al-Qaeda did that day. So I think that for many people, I suppose it was certainly of my generation, it was almost like a loss of innocence that you experienced on just one day.
The people in the Pentagon in uniform, the civilians, the contractors, down to the people who clean the offices, are there because they love this country. They're willing to work long hours, hard hours. After 9/11, I saw them under incredible stress, still doing their jobs, traumatized by the attack, but ready to continue to sacrifice to see the young men and women who go out and do the actual fighting have everything they needed, and to see that this country was properly protected in spite of this attack.
So tell me about the day after 9/11, because I can't even imagine, knowing what happened, showing up to work the next day.
It was fairly traumatic to come back into a burning building and a place where you had seen some pretty serious situations with patients. And when I got home, the ash from the Pentagon was covering our other car that was there. And that ash was not only the Pentagon building, but it was also human remains. And that was probably the most shocking moment for me after 9/11. I can handle taking care of patients and seeing burns and injuries, but seeing that was really kind of slapped me in the face.
So what do you remember about the first year of the war?
Well, the first year of the war, I remember the US essentially had to learn very fast on the job, really. What Al-Qaeda wanted, who its main operatives were, how many cells it had around the world, what its follow-up plans were. There was a great concern that there would inevitably be a follow-up attack to 9/11 in the days, weeks, and months afterwards. Obviously, there was, I think, a good deal of fear in the world afterwards.
We were suddenly at war with not with a nation state, but with a bunch of terrorists. And I think in that first year, many of us realized, wow, just leaving them alone would not be sufficient. We had to respond, but we had a long, long task ahead of us.
How did Al-Qaeda react after 9/11?
Well, after 9/11, Osama bin Laden was somewhat surprised at the ferocity of the American response. Bin Laden thought of America as a paper tiger, one that would send in a couple of cruise missiles, for example, but not go the step of invading Afghanistan and really looking to root out Al-Qaeda. So he was surprised by the American invasion. Al-Qaeda retreated, and ultimately its operatives that survived the American invasion or weren't captured scattered at various parts across the world.
And tell me a bit more about Al-Qaeda's activities afterwards.
Well, yeah, so Al-Qaeda has now lost its base in Afghanistan and its fighters go to Pakistan primarily, but in years to come we also see affiliates rising up in places like Yemen and much further down the line in Syria and in Somalia. But there was a second wave of attacks planned by Al-Qaeda. Thankfully, the US managed to thwart these, but for example, the shoe bomber Richard Reed tried to detonate an explosive on a flight from Paris to Miami. That was thwarted by the passengers on the plane, but of course we still see the after effects of it today when you're asked to take your shoes off before boarding a flight, for example. And now it's not just airports, of course, it's all these soft targets that terrorists increasingly look to hit. We've had to radically rethink how we go to music venues, the security around train stations, and all these other places that ISIS, Al-Qaeda have attacked in the recent months and years.
The United States also made some mistakes in that first year. We failed to reach out properly to other Muslims and convince them of what we were intending to do. And so they gave it their own vision. They thought we were occupying them, that we were seeking to oppress them, and they didn't respond the way we had hoped.
I remember Secretary Rumsfeld always said that he wanted to rebuild the Pentagon quickly, right? He wanted to rebuild it within, I think, a year. Why was that so important to do that within a year?
Because we wanted to send a message back to the terrorists that, yeah, they put a big hole in our building. They really caused a problem and they hurt a lot of our people, but they did not hit us with a knockout punch. Those guys and gals who were working to rebuild the Pentagon were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to do the rebuilding. They never stopped. The leadership decided they were doing so much and doing it so well that they were going to take a break for Christmas Day. The workers talked among themselves and went back to the bosses and said, no, we're not taking that day off. We're going to keep working even on Christmas Day until this building is finished, because that's what we said we'd do, and that's what we're gonna do, because we're gonna let Al-Qaeda know they didn't win with this attack.
Did they make the deadline? Like, was the building finished within a year?
It was really amazing, but the workers actually finished the building within the year, actually a little bit early. They not only rebuilt the building and put the offices back in, they built a chapel in the spot where the plane hit.
Why do we fight?
For America, we fight to protect our people, to protect our interests, but many times because someone attacks us. America's not real big on conquering other countries. We've never really been big on that other than when someone provoked us to do it. 9/11 was not because we had done anything wrong. 9/11 was because someone with a very different ideology thought we were a threat to them. So they tried to preemptively knock us out of this fight before we were even in it. They found out America is a pretty daunting foe because the American people, as peaceful as we like to be, can be pretty fierce when provoked.
Al-Qaeda really showed its murderous intent, and it's a murderous intent that isn't going to diminish with time and through negotiations. There just wasn't the option of not responding to 9/11. Al-Qaeda had used Afghanistan as this base to set up a plethora of training camps, people from around the world coming to Afghanistan to get the training they needed to carry out terrorist operations all around the world. These children are being brainwashed, they're being indoctrinated, and many of them, as the territory in Syria and Iraq is taken away from ISIS, will be returning to their home countries. They're going to be the next generation, potentially, of jihadists in the West. So this is something that I think we're going to be living with the consequences of for decades and decades to come. And the only way we're going to be able to get them out of that territory in Afghanistan was a military response.
So what exactly should the lesson be for the American people?
The American people, even if they're knocked down, they get up, they keep fighting, they keep pushing until a job is done. And I think the example of the rebuilding within a year is a perfect exemplar of that spirit.
So how do we fight back?
There's no choice except fighting back against Al-Qaeda and those who support them. There is no compromise possible with them. And by the way, it's even more deadly and urgent for other Muslims. They really believe that other Muslims are standing in the way of their vision for the future. So there's no possibility of compromise whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim. Either you fight or, in their vision, you die.
They're still out there, they're still determined to do us harm, and they're going to continue that until we either eliminate them or that we so discredit their ideology, so disconnect them from their claim that they are being blessed by God in doing this, that they back off. We should not give up. We must continue this fight because America's worth it.
So guys, this has been a super interesting week getting to talk to all these people. I feel like I learned a lot.
I just hope that people don't tire out because it has been 16 years, right? And I think people have lost sight of why exactly are we fighting? Why are we still involved? Why are Americans still dying for this?
Even though the real important thing is that throughout these 15 years, we've been incredibly resilient and being able to withstand and support it. And I think what we need is for the rest of the country to remain engaged so that support is still there.
From my personal experience, my parents are political refugees from another country, and there's a reason why they decided to come to America. They could have gone to any other country in the world.
You know, I'm just so thankful for the people who've served in this war. I mean, it's kind of a never-ending war, but they've continued to persevere for the sake of our country. That we have to remember American ideals and American principles and teach them to future generations as well, so that future generations are committed